All right, y'all, I'm back with another installment to Natives to Negroes. So, we went over the Gullah people, and I wanted to kind of dive into another aspect of these tribes and how they were split apart or classified and the territories they occupied right before we got into the Seminole Wars and the wars that ensued after that, because identifying who these people are culturally matters. You know what I'm saying? Now, this excerpt by Frank G. Speck, he states, "It should be mentioned here that at certain times since the origin, there have been born individuals with a very dark shade of skin. These black-skinned Yuchi, as they are termed, are looked upon as being more closely related to the sun than the rest of the people. They are said to be his direct offspring, their mothers having become pregnant by the sun." And he goes on to state how there are several dark-skinned Yuchi living today. He hasn't ran across none though, but they have a strong legacy and have kept tabs on the history of their own people and the people surrounding them. So we'll see their take now. The Savannah River Band of Yuchi Indians is a matriarchal society historically recognized by the South Carolina Royal Colonial Government in 1750. Throughout the colonial period, the Yuchi people often established town in close proximity to those of the Creek people, but also were the sole occupants of some provinces. Yuchi towns and villages once existed in many locations throughout southeastern North America. Yuchi villages were also established in Florida, where they became political allies of the Seminole Creeks. Many Yuchi families were deported to the Indian Territories in the 1830s along with Creeks, and forced by the federal government to live in a section of the Creek Nation, despite repeated requests to have their own tribal identity. The Muskogee Creek Nation uses the angelicized word Yuchi for this tribe's name. Bureau of Indian Affairs officials in Oklahoma use the word Yuchi. But when the Yuchi tribe of Oklahoma applied for federal recognition, BIA officials in Washington, D.C. struck out all references to the Yuchi and replaced it with Yuchi. In contrast, colonial officials in South Carolina and subsequently in Georgia used the word or words similar to Yuchi to label the Yuchian people on the lower Savannah River, Ogeechee to label the Yuchian people on the Ogeechee River, and Hogologi for the Yuchian people at the headwaters of the Savannah River. This traditional spelling was continued by the states of South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama. Therefore, henceforth, Yuchi and Yuchian will be used. It should be emphasized that the Yuchi people of the lower Savannah River Basin were a different ethnic group than the Hokologi Yuchi of the Tennessee River Valley and western North Carolina, who migrated into the Savannah River Basin about the same time that the province of Carolina was founded. The two bands of Yuchi probably shared many cultural traits, but they spoke different languages that may have been mutually unintelligible, or at least as different as Swedish and Norwegian. In 1890, United States Census was the first to survey the so-called 5 civilized tribes in the Indian Territory. It also gave special designation to the Yuchi people as a distinct ethnic group and used that spelling, not Yuchi or Uchi. The only word that the Yuchi are definitely known to have called themselves in their own language is Tsoya, which means children of the sun. Other angelicized names include Yuchi, 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 Utsi, Roundtown people, Ogeechee, Geechee, Congoria, Chogalea, and Hogalogi. The Savannah River Yuchi call themselves Uchi. One Yuchi organization in Tulsa, Oklahoma calls its members Yuchi. The other in Sapalopa, Oklahoma calls itself Yuchi. A band of Yuchi in northern Florida calls itself Yuchi. Other bands in eastern Tennessee and Alabama usually call themselves Yuchi. When Yuchi from the upper Tennessee River Basin settled on the upper Savannah River Basin, they were clearly labeled Hogeloge on all European maps in order to distinguish them from the other Yuchi bands. Being American Indian in South Carolina is much more than wearing traditional regalia and attending powwows. It involves bringing a different and more balanced perspective to our history, our present, and our future. Much was lost through race laws and through the errors of census takers during the 1800s, who identified Yuchi Indians as mulatto, white, or black. In 1924, the Racial Integrity Act made it illegal to identify as an Indian under penalty of being arrested and other negative ramifications. Thus, many Native Americans were incorrectly identified by the law and their neighbors as either white or African American. The oral history of the Yuchi teaches that they were created by the sun, a visible manifestation of the Creator, and the first Yuchi man was Tsoyaha, meaning offspring of the sun. Tsoyaha, that's interesting, sounds like Yah, is also the Yuchi name for themselves as a tribe. Our language that is very unique, not closely related to any known language. Little is shared about the Yuchi at the time of their first encounter with the Europeans. In 1567, Spanish explorer Juan Pardo noted the existence of a group whom he identified alternatively as Uchi and Huchi, although his reasons for this remain unclear. By the end of the 17th century, we Yuchi became more clearly identifiable in the documentary record. In this period, they appear to have resided in a wide range of locales across the southeast, with the center of gravity of Yuchi life shifting south and east toward the English settlements in South Carolina, and after its founding, Georgia. Georgia was created as a buffer zone to prevent us, the Yuchi, from raiding near plantations and freeing slaves, both our native brothers and Africans, and their African descendants to escape to Spanish Florida. Very little is told about the Underground Railroad going south rather than north. During the first half of the 18th century, the Yuchi inhabited several towns on the Savannah River. We the Yuchi still remain on the Savannah today. So that's giving them the spiel, their history, the rundown in their own words. So this is a anthropology publishing from the University of Pennsylvania Museum. And it goes in to say about the Yuchi Indians. Among the indigenous tribes of the southeastern United States living within a territory roughly defined by the borders of Georgia and South Carolina, exhibiting a type of culture common to the inhabitants of the country bordering on the Gulf of Mexico, east of the Mississippi River, whose members called themselves Tsoyaha, offspring of the sun, otherwise known as the Yuchi, constituting an independent linguistic stock called Uchian in Powell's classification. Their earliest associations, insofar these revealed by history and tradition, were identified with the banks of the Savannah River where they lived, at a very early time in contact with the southern band of the Shawnee, and near the seats of the Cherokee, the Catawba, the Santi, and the Yamasee. These tribes, together with the Yuchi, represent 5 distinct linguistic stocks, a greater diversity of language than is usually found and so restricted in the area east of the Mississippi. The Yuchi maintained that they were originally one of the large tribes of the southeast, which, suffering oppression at the hands of encroaching tribes of the Muskegon stock, became much reduced and was finally incorporated, together with the Shawnee, into the loose coalition of southeastern tribes known in the colonial history as the Creek Confederacy, or the Creek Nation. And they joined, and they were pretty much forced to amalgamate. They didn't want to really join the Creeks. They've stated several times over that they never really intermingled with them or married. They were just neighbors, if you will. And I don't think they kind of respected the Creeks' morals. During the Creek War, the Yuchi took a prominent part in affairs and later removed with the so-called Creek Nation to the lands beyond the Mississippi River, where they are now located. They still remain to a certain degree their cultural unity in spite of contact with aliens for so long a period. In 1900-1901, some of them joined the crazy snake band of Creeks who threatened trouble for the Dawes Commission over the allotment of lands in the Creek Nation. And the rest of it just touches on the different published sources of information on the Yuchi. They don't have a lot of myths, but the main one is that they were the original occupants of eastern Georgia and South Carolina and have no migration legend. And they had a dance with the original tribe and a dispute had happened, so they all departed. And that's just a tradition that's kind of widespread. So we get to the Seminoles now, and we touched on the Gullah in the last video, who the Gullah Geechee were. Now we know who the Geechee are. So we got the Gullah and Geechee, the old Geechee. And these people were big players in the Seminole Wars. So we kind of got the players and the pieces set on the chessboard. Now we can move forward to the action, because it gets real good, because these motherfucking Seminoles was not going out without a fight. I think it lasted about 50 years, if not longer. You know what I'm saying? So it got real grimy. And then we'll start to discuss the video I've been kind of holding off and waiting to put out, but I got my Creeks to Crackers video that is gonna kind of delve into how the Creeks got split and put into a caste system, if you will. But I don't even want to blame the Europeans, because it's deeper than that, because my research is showing me that we've always been tribal, and how we approach each other, our culture, our way of life. We just been here for so long, like millions and millions of years. So it's just only natural. It ain't nothing wrong with it, but the issue comes when outsiders come in and try to hide and distort the truth and twist it in their favor and create his story